My name is Kevin Martin. I want to thank Thom Betts for being with me today. I think having him here has been really informative, or I hope you guys found it really informative in terms of what we can really do with NDVI maps. We talk a lot about what we do with sensor technology. Just wanted to take a few minutes to show you how that actually plays out in a commercial setting and what we're trying to offer growers with this sensor technology in a way that can add value and increase their management opportunities and inform decisions on their farms.
I'm using NDVI to see how the vine is progressing throughout the growing season. So, this map's showing a really dark blue, where come August or even my post-bloom sprays, if it starts showing that, the vine's actually starting to slow down the growth or decrease growth, that could be a really good indicator that there's too much crop there. But
yeah, it looks like you've got another, and I'm flying a little blind here because I haven't even seen this map yet, but it looks like you've got another one labeled 810, which I assume is 810 growing degree days after wild grape bloom.
Yep.
So, which would represent probably the last time you ran through the vineyard. Can we take a look at that and see what it looks like? So what's interesting here is we're taking a look at this 810 NDVI reading that was probably a berry moth spray that happened. So looking at this, we see an interesting distribution of NDVI in terms of typically at this time of the year we start to see issues with saturation. The vines are so large at that point it's hard to see differences, and we do see some differences. So at least in terms of actual NDVI readings, we're at 0.58 to 0.88 on most of the acreage, which is actually the same amount of variation or spread that we saw in the 10 to 16 inches of shoot growth. So Thom obviously relocated the sensor here, but was able to capture meaningful differences in how the vines progressed, and some of them certainly have not filled out the canopy yet. Otherwise, we would see some higher values. So, hindsight being 2020, it looks like, at least based on NDVI alone, some thinning was probably warranted because vines are not developing the way that maybe a grower would want them to. But it's important to keep in mind that this is 2018, so there was some drought stress that probably nobody could have predicted driving some of this vine growth. And is there anything you did throughout the season that, in terms of using these maps to make decisions on this block? I know you've kind of been focused on some other blocks, but
well, we obviously use it for crop estimation. That's what our main objective was with NDVI, is trying to figure out a better way to narrow up our error in crop estimation. That was our big one, and our second one is pulling sugar samples, so before harvest, so that way we know where the riper grapes are, and also trying to keep those separate from where they're not as ripe, just to have a handle on what's in our blocks more so than just in a field in general.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and so the one thing we would do, which is actually hard to see visually going back, looking at the last map and then looking at this one, is to see if there's a correlation between the early NDVI and the late NDVI. And if that pattern does hold up, I think that's where you start to consider doing variable rate soil sampling in there. And we very often layer different sources of data as well. And when we see those strong correlations, that's really what would dictate soil sampling protocols. And then eventually, if you saw differences, would also inform you in terms of actually doing variable rate soil applications. But it looks like, 2018 was a challenging year for both growers that practice variable rate management and growers that don't, because a lot of the environmental factors were a little unanticipated in that we started out with a very strong growing season, and I think people would probably felt confident 30 days post-bloom that it was a good year to push yields. And then drought stress followed up by a very wet fall sort of led to maybe hindsight being that it would have been a better year to remove some more crop. So it is important to really know how close you are to that line in terms of crop load pushing the limits of what's realistic, because there were certainly some growers that don't practice sensor technology work or variable rate management and They don't take enough crop estimates to inform them of their decisions, and it was really easy to get a yield and crop load that was really carried away from the reality of 2018. So the Bettses were able to keep it in the realm of reality by taking a lot of crop estimations and by doing it in a way that is informed through spatial sensor technology. So they were close enough that they were in a situation where it was not necessarily easy to get everything to 16 bricks by the first week, but they also knew that even with less than ideal conditions, they were going to be okay eventually. And I think that's what we see, part of what we see in this NDVI map that Thom took at 810 growing degree days. The vines are probably a little stressed, but they will come through and actually reach full maturity in terms of bricks accumulation at least. So one of the things that happens is over the course of a discussion with sensor technology is the viticulturalist really tries to understand, in addition to crop load, which is kind of like trying to manage the problem to make sure we can meet minimum standards, what's really driving the differences in vine size, so over the long run we can improve the performance of an individual block. And the one thing that really strikes me is part of the western block is significantly worse than the other two. So these are all on the same scale right now, and there are certainly spatial patterns, but that one block in general has represents most everything that is on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of NDVI readings, and most of that is located on one half of the vineyard, or one half of that block. So is there something going on in that block that is kind of moving it away from what's happening in terms of NDVI and the rest of the blocks?
Well, that western block, it's a block that has different elevations, so there's a little bit of a sandy knoll loam soil that goes diagonal across it, and that's where you see the bigger vines. And there's a little howl in between that runs diagonal, and then the southern western corner is sloped that way, so that's why you see it a lower NDVI.
So one of the things, because you have a higher quality GPS than you necessarily need to do NDVI, but we should be able to take a look at an elevation map as a result of the GPS running through this vineyard. So 660 is low and almost 700 is high. Yeah, so you can see where there is an unusual pattern in that area in terms of elevation, but it also looks like that it's a very predictable slope because the rows are going in this direction, right?
Yes.
So it would be fairly easy to drain. It appears that way anyway, looking at the map. And in doing so, you would certainly improve your ability to increase potential crop in the future. Probably the first thing I would recommend, because a drainage project is a pretty big deal, you take this NDVI map, you go out and you do your pruning weights based on where the variation is, and we can start to quantify really what the difference is in vine size in this area where the elevation is creating some issues with water. And then we can see how much of an improvement we might see if we just did drainage in that area to see if, this is something that's urgent, that, I would encourage you to go out and borrow some money to do as fast as you could and as soon as you had time, or if it's something that you should just keep an eye on and continue to manage your crop load a little bit different where the vines have wet feet, and 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the road when capital is more available, you would be able to make that investment at that time, depending on how great those differences in vine size are. And even just taking pruning weights this dormant season, you might want to see how these vines with wet feet respond to some careful crop load management. And so even if we see really low pruning weights in that area for a year, we could try to see if we could repair them a little bit without doing something as intensive as a drainage project. And if we can't, that's probably where I would say financially it gets a little more urgent to do that as soon as we could. And if we can, if we can turn a half-pound vine into a 1.5 pound vine, we get to a point where it's not necessarily your best block, but you're probably not losing money on that area either. So you can then worry about other problems and put this, sort of toward the middle of your road of priorities in terms of when you tackle it, knowing that you can, but maybe this year is not the right time to do it. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below or contact our offices as well. This will be part of a loaner sensor program, so if you're interested in having this exact same conversation with myself or hopefully a future viticulturalist here at LERGP, contact our offices, sign up for the loaner sensor program, and you'll have maps that looks just like this, and we can have some discussions about what those sensor technology reveals about your block.